The shark is out to attack again. With decades of bitterness and anger towards the PGA and an appetite for conflict, golf legend Greg Norman is throwing his sport into chaos yet again. But this time, he's doing it with Saudi money, and while he's doing so, he's drawn a lot of criticism from fans and colleagues alike, with many claiming that he's ruined traditional golf. Stick around as we find out why. First up, business with Saudis. If you're an avid golf fan, you probably know the good old game of golf has lately been split into two groups of sorts, with one side supporting the traditional PGA Tour and the European Tour, and the other side is the newcomer LIV Golf that's being backed by massive funding from the Saudi Arabian Investment Fund. And off the course, former world #1 player Greg Norman is LIV Golf's chief executive. Given Norman's bona fides, including globally renowned The Shark title and a history of taking on the PGA Tour establishment, he was, as they're calling him, the missing piece. LIV is being touted as the most controversial golf league for a number of reasons, but that's being overshadowed by the big money that's being thrown into it. It's the biggest prize money in the history of golf, which for the first 7 LIV events is $25 million. $20 million is awarded based on each player's score ranking, and $5 million divided among the top 3 teams. Next, Greg Norman is whitewashing Saudi human rights records. It also recently increased its total pledge to $2 billion for the 2023-25 seasons in order to entice top-tier players, many of whom, such as Tiger Woods, rejected a mind-blowingly massive offer to join the league. Norman recently suggested that the 15-time major winner has turned down a sum in excess of $150 million and possibly close to $1 billion. That's huge, but there's an issue with the LIV's financial backer. For starters, there's a widespread belief that the Saudi government is using golf in the same way that China and Russia use the Olympics, and Qatar is using the World Cup this fall to sports wash a long, hideous global image that was highlighted in 2018 by the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who wrote columns for the Washington Post and was critical of the Saudi monarch Mohammed bin Salman. And now Norman's dismissive comments on Saudi human rights record. At best, Norman's explanations for doing business with the Saudis have been clumsy. We've all made mistakes, is how he likes to put it. And no, he isn't talking about himself. This was him minimizing the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, not to mention the sorry state of women and minority rights in the kingdom that's also been a serious concern for human rights organizations for decades. The statement has not only been criticized by Amnesty International and Khashoggi's fiancée, but also the Australian golfers who are stunned and shocked about their former golfing hero's comments, including the 7-time LPGA major winner Kerry Webb, who said on social media, "The little girl in me just died." The Australian pro golfer Wayne Grady, who's been an old friend of Greg Norman, too voiced his concerns and disappointment, saying that the shark should hang his head in shame for trivializing PGA. Next, it's either LIV or nothing. According to Norman, Saudi Arabia is changing their culture within their country and downplaying its government's role in LIV golf, telling Sky Sports News, "I don't answer to Saudi Arabia. I report to neither their government nor MBS." Clearly, since Norman and his allies can't defend Saudi atrocities, they try to act as if it isn't the point. They want you to believe it's all about golf. 3 putts are mistakes. Khashoggi's murder was not. Blood money is still money, and that's always been the whole appeal of Saudi Arabia's budding golf tour. Every time the topic of the kingdom's atrocities and its funding is brought up in the LIV, Norman quickly shifts to what appears to be a more pressing issue for him, his desire to change how the PGA Tour continues to operate. Priorities, folks. And now, Norman slams PGA. After the PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan recently confirmed that any player competing in any event on the rival circuit would be suspended indefinitely, Norman has slammed the league publicly and made some pretty valid and interesting points while doing so. He describes the move as vindictive and said it had only deepened the divide between the tour and its members, calling PGA largely a monopoly that's had full control for decades. Norman went on to add that if they want to look at it through a prism, why does the PGA Tour have 23 sponsors doing business with Saudi Arabia worth more than $40 billion? Why is it okay for the sponsors? He asked, why is it acceptable to have a Saudi sponsor, Aramco, the world's largest sponsor of women's golf? Why is it okay for them but not for the LIV league players? Asking if Jay Monahan would go to each and every one of the 23 CEOs of companies investing in Saudi Arabia and suspend or ban them. The hypocrisy in all of this is so obvious, it's loud. Further adding that the league isn't going anywhere because they want to do what's best for the fans, the players, and the commercial business model. Up next, Norman follows in Saudi Kingdom's footsteps. And of course, since controversy follows Norman everywhere he goes, he found himself in yet another sticky situation. That too on the first day of the LIV Golf Series after leading golf writer Alan Shipnuck was thrown out of Phil Mickelson's press conference. Alan tweeted about how a couple of security guards physically removed him from the presser, claiming they were following orders from their boss, whom they refused to name. MBS? Al Capone? Nah, it turned out to be Greg Greg Norman all along. Despite claiming he had no idea of what went down out there, in recent images posted by Allen on Twitter, Norman is seen watching the situation from a distance without intervening and stopping the guards. Never a dull moment in LIV. Next, fans are furious. So, of course, Norman's autocratic actions have drawn a lot of criticism from fans, colleagues, and media alike. Fans think that Norman and Mickelson want to do business with a murderous regime without being held accountable. They want to damage the PGA Tour while still participating when it's convenient for them. What they really are doing is exposing the sad, ugly side of professional golf, where players are almost never answerable to anyone. Because they're not employed by teams, they don't have teammates to hold them accountable or general managers to trade them. Their coaches work directly for them. There aren't many journalists holding them to account either. And since it's not the most glamorous sport, people generally don't care what the golfers are up to. So it's not surprising that for some golfers, their moral compass is always pointing in the direction of the nearest bank. Now, in other news, LIV Golf an irrational threat to the game. If there was any doubt about the bad blood between the PGA Tour and the rival LIV Golf Invitational Series, the breakaway circuit delivered the latest salvo on Wednesday. Just as PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan announced increased purses, a revamped schedule, and major changes to the FedEx Cup playoffs, LIV Golf issued a press release confirming that four-time major champion Brooks Koepka had defected to the new circuit. During a press conference, Monahan, clearly annoyed by the latest development, made the announcement, or confession, that if it were an arms race and the only weapons available were dollar bills, the PGA Tour would be unable to compete with a foreign monarchy spending billions of dollars to buy the game of golf. He further added that PGA encourages healthy competition, but that wasn't the case with the LIV Saudi Golf League, going as far as to call its presence an irrational threat, not concerned with return on investment or game's growth. Next, Rory McIlroy calls Brooks Koepka and others duplicitous. Rory McIlroy has labeled players who join LIV Golf as pretty duplicitous, as Brooks Koepka becomes the latest player to join the new Saudi-backed series. The four-time major champion, Koepka, will compete in the new $250 million 8-event series alongside fellow Americans Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, and Bryson DeChambeau. And McIlroy, being a PGA Tour advocate, isn't happy about the development. He recently stated that he didn't expect the former world #1 to defect to LIV Golf, especially after his initial comments where he'd been publicly skeptical of LIV Golf's key figures, Greg Norman, Phil Mickelson, and Golf Saudi CEO Majid Al Soru. Rory said that he wasn't sure what prompted it and whether it was for legal reasons, but it's pretty dishonest of players to say one thing and then do another, both in public and private. Lastly, LIV rebels allowed in British Open, and after Koepka, along with other big names, began jumping ships, the British Open decided to allow these rebels to compete at St. Andrews. After the inaugural event in Britain earlier this month, the US PGA Tour banned those involved in the rebel venture LIV, but the organizers of last week's US Open refused to follow suit. This stance will be followed at the year's final major, which begins on July 14th in St. Andrews, Scotland. The British Open also announced that players who are exempt or who qualified for the 150th Open in accordance with entry terms and conditions will be able to compete in the championship at St. Andrews. And that's a wrap for this video. Do you agree that Greg Norman is ruining golf by backing the LIV circuit? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. See you in the next one.